Have you ever seen that person who just heads off into the woods totally alone for hours or even days? In a world where we're all hyper connected all the time, that can seem a little strange, right? Maybe even antisocial. But there is some seriously profound psychology at play here. It's a mix of neuroscience, personality traits, and this deep seated human need that we're going to unpack. So, this is the big question, isn't it? And spoiler alert, it's not about running away from people. Not really. For these individuals, it's actually about running towards something. They're chasing a specific state of mind, a really unique kind of mental restoration, and believe it or not, a powerful sense of self. It is a deliberate, calculated choice. And that right there is the key. We have to reframe this. This isn't an escape born from social failure. It's a conscious choice. It's about taking back control, about claiming your own autonomy, and actively seeking out a very specific and very valuable kind of quiet. Okay, this is where it gets really interesting. Researchers break solitude down into two types. On one side, you have what's called not self-determined solitude. This is the stuff that feels bad. It's driven by social anxiety, maybe you feel forced into it, and the result is loneliness and stress. But the solo hiker, they're operating from a place of self-determined solitude. Look at the difference. The drive is internal. It's for personal growth, for peace. The individual has total control. And the outcome isn't loneliness at all. It's a boost in self-esteem, it's mental clarity. So they're not being punished by solitude, they're using it as a tool. So what kind of person is actually drawn to this? Well, the Big Five personality model gives us some really good clues. They usually score high in openness to experience, which makes sense, right? They're curious, they seek out beauty and adventure. They're often low in extroversion, meaning they're introverts. And that's not about being shy, it's about how they recharge their energy. A quiet forest is way more energizing than a loud party. They're also super high in conscientiousness, which is absolutely critical for all the planning and safety you need when you're out there alone. And finally, they tend to be low in neuroticism, giving them that emotional stability to handle whatever the trail throws at them without panicking. All right, now let's get into the hard science, because this isn't just a vague feeling of, nature is nice. Being in a forest physically changes your brain chemistry and your body. This is where psychology and biology just perfectly intersect. The Japanese actually have a wonderful term for this, Shinrin Yoku. It literally translates to forest bathing. It's this whole practice of just immersing yourself in the forest's atmosphere. And its benefits are scientifically proven. So this isn't some new age trend, it's a legitimate form of natural therapy. And here's one of the coolest parts of how it works. As you're walking through the woods, you're not just breathing in air. The trees are releasing these invisible chemical compounds called phytocides. They're basically the tree's natural defense system against germs and insects. And it turns out, they have a pretty incredible effect on us humans too. And this chart just lays it all out. Look at this data. The amount of cortisol, that's your main stress hormone, in your saliva drops significantly. Why? Because the forest environment literally calms your body's central stress response system. Your nervous system actually shifts gears from that high-alert, sympathetic fight-or-flight mode to the calm, parasympathetic rest and digest state. And those phytocides we just talked about, studies show they increase the activity of your natural killer cells. These are a crucial part of your immune system that fights off infections. You literally walk out of the forest healthier than when you walked in. It's amazing. So what about our minds, our focus? Well, there's a great theory for this called attention restoration theory. Basically, our modern lives, filled with screens and alerts, just burn out our ability to concentrate. The forest fixes that in 4 stages. First, you get away from your normal draining environment. Then, you experience something called soft fascination. Think of watching rustling leaves or a little stream. It holds your attention gently, without any effort. This leads to feeling immersed, a sense of extent, like you're in a whole different world. And finally, that world feels deeply compatible with how our brains are wired. It lets our overworked attention finally rest and recharge. Now, of course, being alone in the wild isn't just about peaceful, restorative bliss. It's also about confronting fear. But here's the thing, learning to navigate that fear is precisely what builds such deep psychological strength. Our brains are funny when it comes to risk. We tend to get our fears all wrong. This chart shows what's known as the availability bias. We perceive a high risk from dramatic things we see in movies, like animal attacks or running into a dangerous stranger. But what's the actual statistical reality? The real high risks are much more mundane. Slipping and falling, getting dehydrated, having a sudden health problem. The experienced solo hiker learns to focus on managing the real risks, not the ones from a horror movie script.
And here's the psychological payoff. When you handle a real challenge out there all by yourself, you figure out the trail when you get turned around, you manage a surprise rainstorm, you build something called self-efficacy. That's just a fancy term for the rock-solid belief in your own ability to handle things. And that confidence, it doesn't stand in the woods. You carry that back with you into every single part of your life.
And for some people, the experience goes even deeper. In that vast silence of a forest, a solo hiker can start to touch on something transcendent, something that goes way beyond the boundaries of their everyday self. This quote just perfectly captures what's called this small self effect. When you're standing in front of something so ancient and massive, your own problems, your ego, your anxieties, they just shrink. They seem insignificant. And that feeling of being small isn't crushing. It's actually liberating. It puts your own life into this much bigger, more meaningful context. It's also important to realize that not all forests are created equal. The environment itself matters a lot. A primary, old-growth forest with all its natural chaos, fallen logs, tons of different plants, that rich biodiversity, that's what provides the complex sensory input that leads to awe. You compare that to a managed production forest, where all the trees are in neat rows, it's uniform, homogeneous, and has a much lower restorative value. That messiness of a real wilderness, that's actually key to its psychological power. You know, on a symbolic level, you could say this journey connects to some really ancient archetypes. For some, it becomes a kind of modern-day initiation rite. It's a way to strip away your public persona, your job title, all of that, and find out who you really are when nobody's watching. It's a journey to connect with a more authentic, self-reliant version of yourself. So in the end, the solitary hiker isn't some strange anomaly. They're just actively seeking a functional, healthy, and deeply human experience that many of us have lost. And that kind of leaves us with a question to ponder for ourselves, doesn't it? In all the constant noise and stimulation of our own lives, where do we go to find that restorative silence? Where's your quiet space?